Welcome to Activism is Medicine's Roundtable Forum. Today we're excited to talk with Julie Johnston, the founder of Green Heart Education, and Dr. Peter Carter, the director of the Climate Emergency Institute. Julie and Peter have been engaged in climate activism for many years, and they have important perspectives about issues such as the future of the climate movement, how to engage in an almost full-time manner. How do we as elders try to talk with young people about the climate? So I think you'll enjoy this talk in many different ways. And thanks again for watching. All right, well, welcome to Activism is Medicine's roundtable discussion. Today we're fortunate enough to have with us Julie Johnson, Peter Carter. We're going to talk about a variety of issues, but it may be best for us just to start off and get some background as to, Julie, how did you get involved in climate? How did this all come about for the two of you?
Well, I might have to blame Peter for that. I found my way to teaching environmental education. I was a French teacher by training, and somehow I morphed into an environmental and outdoor educator, which was way more fun. And then when I met Peter, it was almost the same trajectory. He had been a peace activist. He could tell you about that. And then he moved into environmental issues. And then that just moved into climate change quite naturally when we both, Peter a little bit before I did, but when we both noticed what the heck was going on in the world. And we've been working on this stuff ever since. Peter, how about you?
So yeah, you're right. I mean, obviously, I go back a long way with this, and the world has gone completely insane. It's totally falling apart, and I'm horrified at my age because many decades ago, as Julie said, I was with the IPPNW, International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, with the insane escalation of the nuclear weapons between the United States, basically, and the then USSR. Um, uh, um, People may not remember. I mean, every year, both sides were increasing these nuclear weapons, and they actually had a stated policy called MAD, Mutually Assured Destruction. And so actually, we and the peace group were fairly successful in getting Reagan and Gorbachev, to sign this nuclear withdrawal treaty, which Trump took the United States out, and now Putin's taking the Russian Federation out. So to me, it's a ghastly nightmare. The world is in hot wars in the Middle East again, hot war in the middle of Europe, which is absolutely atrociously terrible. You really can't miss it. I mean, it's just awful. And yeah, climate change. So yeah, Julie's right. I'm I'm now for the past 10 years or so, I've been director of the Climate Emergency Institute. At my age now, that keeps me unbelievably busy. It's just impossible to keep up with all the news being published by the scientists and reported by the media. We just had probably the very best paper that's ever been published by Bill Ripple. Bill is a distinguished professor in ecology at the University of Oregon State. And he's put together a very powerful team of climate experts. And they've just published basically what is their fourth paper in 18 months. And they've just published a paper which got a lot of attention from the media, which was very good, called Climate Change 2023. And the opening line on the abstract was Earth is under siege. And it's been under siege for a long time. And it's just it's a frightening paper, but it's a superb scientific paper. They cover everything. So, yeah, what I try and do now is actually try and persuade the science academies and the Royal Societies to get involved and make an intervention, because climate change is a completely insane situation as well. I've just reported on the latest global emissions, which are published by Edgar out of the European Commission. And all our emissions are accelerating still. Over the past 4 years, they've increased faster than they ever have. So, yes, this is insane. We have young people and children, thanks to our governments and fossil fuel corporations, on a hellish heading to the future, what the IPCC calls an unlivable future. So I'll just finally start by saying that the IPCC recent sixth assessment said that we have a narrowing, closing window to secure a livable future for all people. And so it's always great to get together with people who are interested, knowledgeable, and really concerned. So I thank you for that.
You know, one of the issues we've talked about with a number of our speakers is how best, if this is even possible, how best to explain the current situation to young people, you know, including children, including, you know, kids in grammar school or junior high school. How do we tell them the truth about the climate, but at the same time not be so negative and doomist, so to speak, that we either get ignored or criticized? And I know, Julie, you're involved with you know, education in this regard. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, the first thought that came to mind is that young people ought to be educating young people, because young people are using media that my generation hardly understands. Like
You're not a TikToker?
Pardon me?
You're not a TikToker.
I am not a TikToker. I was going to say I probably will never make it. Never make a TikTok. And they keep coming on stream. You know, I just don't think that we're going to be able to. Some of you might be really up on this stuff, but I don't think my generation is going to be able to keep up very well. But I think the work that I do with Green Heart Education is transformative education for sustainability. So one of the things that I'm aware of is that there's a certain age below which kids do not have the sense of agency. They're not, you know, they're just not mature enough to be able to handle this stuff. They wouldn't know what to do with it. They might panic because of it. I mean, I've had 5-year-olds who are having nightmares because we talked about earthquakes at school. So, you know, a lot of them, they won't understand until they're the right age. So in that way, maybe it's a little bit like the birds and the bees. It's not like we can't talk about it around them, but to try and talk to them about it, I think younger children need to let us know that they're ready to talk about it. And then one of the mistakes we've made in the education system is that we have not taught ecological literacy. And so, you know, and that would include things like, you know, how ecosystems nourish us and keep us alive, and what ecosystems depend on, and how ecosystems depend on the climate in which they developed. And so we've done young people a disservice by not teaching them these things. So, you know, there's a lot we need to teach around the climate emergency so that they can understand. And that's why I think we have so many deniers in the world, because my own research has shown that physicists, geologists, and especially geophysicists, because it's fossil fuel corporations that tend to hire them, and engineers are the top 3 sciencey type deniers. And I think it's because they go through these sciencey programs believing that ecology and biology are at the bottom of the ladder, you know, the bottom of the scientific hierarchy. So they don't understand the impacts of climate change, the physics, you know, the laws of physics and stuff around climate change. They don't understand the impacts of those on life-giving systems, ecological systems. So to me, it's more important with younger children just to be getting them outside and teaching them about ecology and things like that. Um, and then let them lead the conversations, just like they do when it's the birds and the bees, and they're ready, they're ready to go to that next level of understanding. Peter taught me something once. I was working in a school as a consultant, and we were doing a nature-based program, and it was supposed to be a happy kind of thing. But one little boy came to me absolutely in tears. He was 8 or 9 years old, and he said, we're killing nature, aren't we? And part of me is like, oh my gosh, yes, we are. I'm really sorry. I didn't say that out loud. That's what I was thinking. But what Peter taught me was we need to say to kids, we're kind of lying. Don't worry, sweetheart. There are lots of adults in the world looking after this problem. So the problem today, of course, you make me cry here, is that there aren't enough of us looking after this problem. So it's a lie now to say that to children. Anybody who's 12 and up, they know what the heck's going on if they're interested. As kids might be totally wrapped up in their boyfriend, girlfriend, or their friends, or their sports, or whatever. But the ones who are interested, they know what's going on. We don't have to teach them anything. So, in fact, they're the ones who are out there on the front lines for the most part. Increasingly getting arrested, increasingly getting thrown in jail. Yeah, it's a McCarthy era again, isn't it? It's become, oh, I'm sorry. Was this supposed to be a happy show? I'm sorry if it was. I was just thinking that, I've been reading about, there's a right-wing politician in Germany, and he's like the Joe McCarthy here. He's riling everybody up to be anti climate change protesters and protectors and activists. And I realized, yeah, that's what Joe McCarthy did. I mean, with very little evidence whatsoever, he just got everybody riled up against the creatives of the world. So, but I think in terms of, I'm not convinced anymore that it's our job to teach young people about the climate emergency. I think the ones who are ready to hear it know it already and know where to go and can teach us a few things. So.
Well, I do think you make a good point. Maybe it is our job to do what we can to make sure that young people are able to experience nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And from that, perhaps under some understanding will come about how it's, all connected, so to speak.
I agree. Yeah.
One of our themes of activism is medicine is we encourage people to be activists, to get involved in some way. You two have been involved with climate work for many, many years. Do you have any thoughts about how activism as medicine could be effective, and how we can get people to be more active, more engaged?
John, I wondered about that. I mean, that was a very attractive title because I'm a long retired medical doctor, as you know. So usually I go and look and see whether there's any research, and actually there is research that there have been several basically online polls of people in various countries, and the researchers have sort of given them little tests, activism tests, and the conclusion of the paper, at least, is that activism produces a sense of vitality. And that was one word, and the other word was I can't remember, commission or something like that. Anyway, they found it actually has a very good effect, so that's encouraging. But what we have to do, I think we have to do two things. The young people for the past over 10 years, they've been pushing ahead with legal challenges, right, to the governments. Right. And there's many, many, many of them. I believe there was a first successful one, at least in North America, in Montana. Yes. So that's good. There was some years ago a successful one in Holland. The big one ongoing at the moment is from a group of young people in Portugal, and they're bringing a legal case to all of the EU countries. So that is huge. So they have excellent, of course, lawyers supporting them. We all need to follow them and encourage them and get involved in those legal actions. That's really, really important. I agree with Julie. They know what's going on. Me and personally, in my generation, I feel very responsible for what's happening. I've been, as a busy doctor, I was very much involved in what we call the world economy. And what we learned over decades the hard way of bringing our cases and challenges on environmental issues is that at the end of the day, everything is decided by governments based on the economics. So we had to then contract economists, okay, and bring them to the panel. And then we had some success. Now, the world economy, I've already mentioned insanity. The world economy, what we call the world economy, which of course runs the world mainly via the big global banks, it really is the definition of insanity because it focuses only on one thing every second, every minute of every day, and that is maximizing the monetary profit. Nothing else comes into the heads of those people and those institutions. And for you and me, it's very hard to understand that, but that's how it is. So it's the world economy over decades, papers and books have been written. This is not a new discovery, but that's what's destroying the future. That's what is basically sacrificing beautiful, wonderful children and young people, sacrificing them to the fossil fuel industry. And we know from now a number of studies and exposés that the fossil fuel industry are more than villainous. They're involved in the most evil activity that humanity could ever have imagined because they are aggressively in all kinds of ways, psychological ways. But our governments are, of course, supporting this evil activity. The International Monetary Fund has just recently revealed that our governments are subsidizing the fossil fuel industry to the tune of $7 trillion a year. That's sacrificing the lives, the livelihoods, and the future of all today's children and youth. So how I've come to regard this is in supposedly moral terms, I suppose. This is the greatest evil imaginable, and I think we have to get that out there. I co-published a book in 2018, Unprecedented Crime, but it's way more than a crime now. And the thing I just finished by saying that the thing I just cannot understand is that we're seeing all this happening, devastating extreme events before our very eyes. There's nobody saying that this is a crime. Nobody, apart from Mary Robinson, bless her, one person who said that this is an evil situation. Nobody apart from Al Gore even says it's bad.
Right.
So
Japanese guys,
I
don't
think
forget.
we've got to get our moral, ethical principles in action here and act like real human beings.
But Peter, don't forget who we're talking to. Global climate crimes.
Well,
Right?
yeah. I mean, and this was a great concept, activity, and this is really what we need to be doing. Yeah. Absolutely. That was a great initiative by the two Johns here.
Mm-hmm.
It has been tough, though, getting people to make that step. I mean, it seems that many people are under such pressure just to survive on their jobs that they, even here in the advanced countries, that they don't want to hear it. I mean, it's not, it's not a priority. And I think part of our difficulty is how to push this to the forefront. Roger Hallam has been making some important statements, recently, criticizing, most recently, The Guardian, for example. People just don't go far enough.
Yeah. Actually, Peter and I have just been talking about that in the last few days, that, when you're talking to scientists, you try and sound sciencey. I'm not a scientist, so I always use that term sciencey. But it's like you have to, everyone says you got to talk the language of your audience. Well, maybe it's time we started teaching the audience what the language needs to be. Like, people don't want to hear that the lives they're living are based on the greatest crime, the greatest evil ever in the history of humanity. Nobody wants to hear that. It's not that we want to hear it, but if we want, it's not just our kids anymore either. I mean, we're all young enough that, we're being impacted already. So, and we're going to be impacted. But I think that we have to start calling a spade a spade. And I've often talked about the importance of compassion and courage when we're doing this work. The compassion needs to be for the children of all species, right? Especially ours, but all the other animals too. And but the courage has to be able to tell the truth. And there have not been very many in any sector, including science and climate science, but also including activism. There have not been very many of us willing to call a spade a spade. What is evil, evil, and what is a crime, a crime. There was something when you talked about activism as medicine. Well, the first thing that came to mind to me is that, for me, responding to deniers online, like on social media, is energizing. And it is rather ironic because it proves that people can be anybody they want to be when they're, hiding online. Although I do have my name there. My name's right there. But and this wouldn't be energizing for everybody because I know enough about the science that I'm able to zing back. But I find it so energizing to tell the truth, to call people on their BS around the climate emergency. It is energizing until the moment it's not. And then I just step away and I take a break from it for a little while. But I can go a good 2-3 weeks and I help with Peter's social media, for example, right? And I just make sure that, first of all, I get rid of it. And I'll tell you, if Elon Musk takes that away, I'm out of there, on Twitter. Right. The ability to block.
Right.
Because I will block people who are rude and people who are insulting. I just get rid of them. There's no discussion with those people. But people who are just sort of spewing I call it the denier overlord's lies, disinformation. I picture there's some great overlord out there telling them, oh, you're a beginner denier? Okay, you do pages 1 to 10 in the denier, handbook. Anyway. I make up all these little stories that's what gets me through. But yeah, so I don't know. Some other people might find that energizing. I don't know. The other thing about activism as medicine, or activism is medicine, that came to mind for me is that we all here, Frank. Yeah, you've got the nice gray in your hair there too. The First Nations, or the Native American medicine wheel, right? Mm. The medicine wheel being the circle of life, the wheel of life. And we are we're in the elder phase of our lives. And what comes with being, we have traveled the circle. So what comes of being in the elder phase of our lives is doing what we're called to do, which is to protect the young ones, right? To work to make life better, to gain a little fat so that when the famine comes, we don't eat, we let the younger people eat. That's in the old days maybe. But I'm thinking of it in that sense, like even if it's just a moral thing rather than I'm not going to eat but I have gained a little bit of weight, and I think of it as I'm an elder now, so I'll let the children eat instead of me eating. that's not an excuse to get chubby, folks. That's not what I'm saying.
Darn.
Yeah, sorry. But then, I mean, this is what keeps me going. This is how I don't get too down and depressed about it all. It's just by being a little off the wall every once in a while about it. So, yeah. Anyway, the other thing, of course, activism as medicine is the antidote for, what was it, Peter? We just saw it was 200 medical journals warned in their recent article that the climate crisis could cause catastrophic harm to human health.
Mhm.
Right. And so activism is part of us staying healthy and safe right now.
Frank, do you have any questions?
Well, I do, and I'm curious about this word denial. And I look at the people around me, and I've got a lot of people in my community who I think you would say are in denial. Pretty educated community here in Bend, Oregon, and very, very little in the way of activism. I mean, these are people who have been to college, they know what's going on, and that they choose to live what I would describe as a pretty narcissistic lifestyle. So is it denial? I'm not sure that it is, because there's so many people under stress now, and one of the characteristic responses to stress is reversion to the familiar, going back to whatever it was you knew before, even if that thing was unhealthy.
Yep.
Because you knew it, and so now we've had this encounter with novelty, with ambiguity, and people are recoiling from that, going back to the familiar. It's not so much that they're in denial, it's just that they're afraid and they're stressed and they're going back. So somehow we have to pull these people into the present moment of life and give them the courage to keep going.
Yeah. I mean, deniers to me are the people who are out there in the world denying. They're not people who don't want to, they just don't want to go there because they're comfortable in their lives, or they're, as you say, things are changing and they want to go back to their old normal. Right? Peter, what are you thinking about that?
I just want to say that, Frank, you hit on something really, really, really important. It's never occurred to me, and I think it's a very good thought that it's more something pathologic within our society, which is bigger than denial. And you mentioned normal. There's a thing that I came across called the inertia of normalcy.
Mhm.
And I remember coming across that, and I thought, oh my God, yes. I mean, that seems so simple, and that's huge, right? I also remember Frank, you talked about narcissism. I made a friend many years ago when we were in Toronto, of a very interesting man who was a psychiatrist and a psychologist. And so I had some good chats with him about the situation, because he was interested in what I was trying to do. And he said one day, he said, Peter, this is expected. We are a society of pathologic narcissism. That's what he said. Real. And then I went back and checked on narcissism, and oh my God, yeah, that's what we are. And I think we've been socially engineered into that, haven't we?
Mhm.
By the what we used to call Madison Avenue, the persuasion of advertising and promoting, and now they have us screened on a constant basis. So yeah, I think it amounts to social engineering, but I think it's very, very important, as Frank said, to look at this in a pretty deep manner. It's not just denial, but underneath that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to have one foot in the health and wellness industry, and I was very excited to be there for a long time. And then one day I just realized, wow, this is all about promoting narcissism. I mean, it's all about you, right? Your health, your body, your fitness. And eventually I had to leave because it was contrary to everything I was hoping for. So yeah, that's been my journey a little bit too.
I wonder if there's I agree completely. And I wonder if there's also a sense of um, an existential dread of loss of identity, right? We used to be citizens, then we became consumers. Now we're just a product of this constant flow of media, information, and fear. And so, if, like the monkey holding on to the monkey bar behind it, so to speak, if it's afraid to let go, it can't move forward, it can't change identities. And we're so absolutely terrified about what it means to let go of this identity that we've all manufactured or had manufactured before us. We kind of, put on like a hood, consumerist, capitalist, human supremacist hood, that we don't know what the hell it's like to live a normal life in community with each other and community with all of life on Earth.
Well, and then you put on top of that climate emergency, right? I mean, right? It's, yeah. I mean, I think that even if the people who don't want to look at it didn't look at it, but if we didn't have the deniers, the outright deniers, the malicious deniers, the paid professional deniers by, they're paid by the fossil fuel corporations or via the fossil fuel corporations, I think we'd be way further ahead, because I mean, an awful lot of people never get involved in politics, government, civic duty, activism, but they'll follow the law,
Right.
so they won't break the rules. If we hadn't had this concerted denier campaign for the last 30, 40 years, we'd be way further ahead, and people would just be naturally, moving along in their lives. Their identity would be as people who are just part of this thing that's moving in the right direction, whereas we're still moving in the wrong direction. So yeah, it's interesting though. I mean, the other thing, I have one girlfriend that I go walking with, and I always dread our walks after a young activist has thrown something at a painting.
Oh, right.
Right? Because she will say to me, it's not the right thing to do. It makes people angry. And I'm like, have you got better idea? No, she never has better idea. Right? She just doesn't want them to do things that make people angry. And then online, quite often, I'll read about, the Just Stop Oil and we stopped doing the, what do we call it, Peter? Like the traffic stops when, here in the city Peter and I live in, we had a young man up on some sort of perch, and a guy got out of his car and pulled the support away, and the guy fell and he busted up his pelvis, and it was just horrible. Like, it was really horrible. And the rest of us were horrified. The fellow whose pelvis was broken because he was, shoved, toppled out of his perch, invited that man to have dinner with him so that they could talk about it. Yeah, that's how good a heart he had. And the man refused. So to me, that was a refusal to look at anything that's going to make my life uncomfortable. I don't want to see it. I don't want to hear it. Certainly don't want to be stopped in traffic by it, But I try and say to people, if you have people angry because you're blocking a road, you have woken them up. Mm-hmm. Because sleeping people aren't angry. Right? So, yeah, I don't think anybody needs to apologize for doing things that piss people off. Yeah.
We might be able, certainly at our age, to be of some sort of assistance to the youth. I was very happy to read a really good article recently. I think it was in the New York Times. And I can remember very well in 1988, when James Hansen made his historical speech to Congress, in which he said, I am 99% certain that we are into global warming today, and that not far away, we're going to see the effects on extreme weather events. Now, the paper that he published prior to that was an absolutely amazing paper. He anticipated everything that we're seeing today. But the point I'm trying to make is that following that, there was a huge support across all political parties and everyone to recognize this and to tackle it. So, you know, we have lived under decades of this polarization, right? But it didn't start off like that.
No.
Didn't start off like that at all. And the other thing that I've tried to sort of present, and I borrowed this from a Discovery magazine many years ago. We have been making, and we are still making, a choice between the worst of all possible futures and the best of all possible futures.
Mm.
And I try and remember that the complete switch, which of course we have to make, off all fossil fuels and onto 100% clean renewable energy, which has been proved possible for many years. That is a completely new world. It's like a golden age, right? Because the very nature of fossil fuels results in so much power, conflict, the wars we're seeing. And I remember very well decades ago, those pioneers in renewable energy pointing out what a great world we would transform to simply by making this choice to change our source of energy. So that's something that may be helpful to the young people perhaps as well. The other thing, the final thing I want to mention is that the world is very confusing, right? It's not just the deniers. I mean, you know, the science has always been confusing, and it still is. So when I got the invitation from John, I started looking at, okay, what are the best resources for the young people? And I sort of made a list of them that I can sort of share online. And some of them are very good. Actually, the best one is called Climate Emergency Action. It's done by young people, and it explains everything to young people. They've got a whole series of great YouTubes. So that's something that we could work on as well.
That'd be good.
That's nice.
It seems to me that even from 2019, that the predictions, the scientific predictions have over time become more dire. In other words, you know, at one point it was we have 50 years, and then the next point it was, well, we probably have 10 years to turn this around. But I think now there's a significant number of people that believe it's almost too late, that so much is baked in that even if tomorrow we were able to do a complete transition to clean energy, there's going to be consequences. From your analysis, Peter, what can we expect in the
Well,
next
the first
10
thing,
years
John, is,
from the
and
science?
thanks for reminding me, the most important conclusion published statement of the science, which for some reason I have no understanding, which has not been communicated at all, came from the IPCC. Now, I have my problems with the IPCC. They're pretty compromised. However, the IPCC has told the world, but is not being communicated, that global emissions have to be put into decline rapidly on a, quote, immediate basis. Now, that's in the Big Six assessment, but also in 2019 at the Madrid COP, the chair of the IPCC, Hossein Lee, who is a traditional economist from South Korea, shocked me in a rather delighted way, because when he was on the opening panel of all the bigwigs presenting the situation for the climate conference, in the middle of his presentation, he said, well, we do have to realize that global emissions have to be put into decline within a year. And he said, yeah, next year, global emissions have to be declining. Otherwise, we will not be able to hold to 1.5 degrees C. Then 2 years later, at the Glasgow COP, he surprised me even more by saying rather similar, but he said, if we don't put emissions into immediate decline, we will miss 1.5 degrees C and 2 degrees C. This is the most important single statement by far that has ever been made from science. Science has not communicated it. The media has not communicated. I only knew because I was there in Madrid. But it's in the assessment. So there's no question. The science is definite. Emissions have to go down today. And that's the biggest thing that we can do to help of all, and that is to get that out there.
Do you
And
remember for quite a while we've been saying it's not up to individuals, and it it's a government thing, it's a policy thing, it's a system thing, it's got to be economy wide. The fossil fuel corporations have to, do something. Well, maybe it is time to go back to not blaming people, because apparently that was a denier thing, that was fossil fuel thing. Let's blame the individual. But maybe we have to go back to that. And yeah, do you remember that song I wrote, Peter? Something about the burning age is over and
Yeah.
time for the global age of solar energy or something. I can't remember, but it was like the world is going to be safer, cleaner, healthier, more equitable, more peaceful, and more beautiful. So who can say no to that, right? But right, lots of people are. That's the thing. So what if instead of, because what isn't working is getting our governments to do more than just, like, you guys, we're in Canada, right? So our prime minister, bless his heart, his government declared a climate emergency one day, and the next day he spent billions of dollars on a pipeline for oil and gas. So yeah, that's what we're dealing with. So what if we went back to, I'm just putting this out there, it's a new thought, but what if we remember in the 60s and 70s, all those, turnaround decade and getting people to turn the water off when they brush their teeth and not drive so much. What if we started going back to all that? We literally cut emissions ourselves and then said to our government, see, we're serious about this. Would that work? I don't know. It's just a thought that bubbled up as you guys were talking.
J-Lo?
I think it would work. I think a lot of things would work, and that's one of them. I mean, what do we tell the young kids to do, right? And I think
Recycle, yeah,
right, recycle. That's not enough. And I think there's two parts to that, Julie. The first is that we have to do that. We have to say what you just said. We have to tell people that. We have to do that. We have to demonstrate it. We have to show it, and show how easy and simple it is to do, right? And I think the second thing is we also have to give people some clarity. The clarity around, both of you have dealt with this, I'm sure, much more than I have, but it's like, is it 1.5? Are we 1.35? Is it 1. Where are we? Where are we now? Or the two big important questions are, where are we now and where are we going? Right? And then what do we have to do to change that trajectory? Right? And I mean, I still see articles being published right now, Julie, that say, we can still stop at 1.5. Bull. I mean, it's just not going to happen. It's not chemically, geologically, physically possible to do that now. That ship has sailed, that bus has left. And so I think for the two of you, being a great combination of educators, being able to give young people a sense of what's possible and how they can increase their agency is really key. And both those two things are necessary. And I focus on the clarity part, because so many people are like, well, if we just do this, we can stay at 1.5. I'm like, stop. You're getting paid to write articles on this, and you're citing things from 2017. So I think both those pieces would be very helpful for young people, especially to get them into activism and help them stay in activism as a way of being and a way of life.
I have a cartoon here. I'm going to share with you guys. It's two people. One of them, you can't really tell what the other one's doing. Okay. So one guy says to the other guy, why so optimistic about, and you could tell someone had crossed it out and they changed it to 2019. So this is a New Year's Eve cartoon. Okay. What do you think it will bring? Everything seems so messed up. And the other one says, I think it will bring flowers. 2019 or the new year, we'll bring flowers. And the guy says, oh, how come? He says, because I am planting flowers. It's like, what? Of course. Right? I love it. I love it.
Love that.
I'll show it to you. See if you can see it. I mean, there it is, just to prove it, Anyway.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Will it really be possible, though, to replace the carbon fuels with alternative energy, given the way that, developing countries are really developing? I mean, isn't it going to take more than just a transition of energy and require some very significant cultural changes?
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely transformation for sure. But human beings have lived through all these times, times that need to come. We've lived through those times, right? We've lived without fossil fuels for 200,000 years. We lived without fossil fuels. So,
well, Frank mentioned consumerism, right? I mean, first of all, I was called a baby boomer, right? Then I was called the affluent society, right? Then I was called the me society, right? And then I was called a consumer society. But I think it all goes back to what Frank mentioned. So I think we are the me society, right? It's all me. And somehow we really have to get out of that. I mean, that's an emotional, psychological, spiritual transformation. And many of us have been involved in that. And I think that's fundamentally important. But as many people have written countless books again and magazines and articles, we have to reverse the consumerism. No amount of technology, or I read recently that there's white hydrogen, which is very, very exciting. Okay, but no amount of technology or new energy or different foods to eat, and we've got all that. Okay, is going to work unless we drive our consumerist economy and put it into reverse. We can't carry on consuming and spending, and it's just nothing's going to work without that.
Yeah, that's my thought.
I'm reminded of a book I wanted to write years ago. I always had friends say, oh, don't get so emotional. You have to speak softly or people won't listen to you. And I'm always like, we're talking about the end of life on Earth. You want me to be quiet about that? You don't want me to get emotional? What do I do about that? So I started writing a book, and I ran my proposed title past a friend who has 2 sons. And the book is called What Parents Don't Know About Climate Change is Killing Their Children.
Ooh.
And this mom went, oh, like she literally recoiled. I'd never seen anyone actually literally recoil before. She recoiled in her chair, like, whoa, So I sort of put that on the back burner because I thought, oh, so parents aren't ready to hear it. Well, Peter, you know how sometimes you feel guilty, you feel like you haven't done enough? I wish I'd written that book when I thought about it, because the me generation, perhaps we can mold that into a me and my kids generation, so at least it's not just me, it's like me and my kids, and how do we stay safe? Like we're all talking emergency preparedness, I think, in the West. Am I right? Like, do you guys talk about that in the States?
Yep.
Getting ready, like you got your little grab and go bag in case the wild
the fires,
In case there's a fire or a flood.
Yeah, and so we live along that same fault line that the San Francisco earthquake and
one of the few.
So that's what we talked about. I was at a meeting the other night, and the guy said, listen, I'm going to talk to you about earthquake survival, and if you've got that down pat, you'll survive anything else, right? But now I'm starting to think, like, what about emergency preparedness for climate change? Bringing it home. Like, we had sea to sea wildfires in Canada. Summer of 23 is going to go down in infamy, right?
Right.
They were right across Canada. I'm betting there were a lot of people not ready to evacuate when they had to. And the more we can talk to, it was interesting, Peter, we have met the fellow who did this emergency preparedness workshop the other day. And we had talked to him about climate change, and he's very interested in climate change. And I thought that what he was doing was around climate change. He mentioned it was 2 lines on a PowerPoint in his presentation. That was it. So it isn't, it's not in the psyche yet. You know, I guess people aren't hearing the term climate emergency. So they don't get yet how serious it is, or they think that it's something that they can argue about or discuss. You know, when something else is an emergency, that's not the time to talk about it. We sometimes joke, you know, well, the house is on fire and the firefighters are sitting around in lawn chairs on the front yard trying to figure out, is this an emergency or not? Should we put the fire out? We haven't been maybe using that term enough. What do you think?
Yeah.
Haven't
Emergency.
been putting things in context, because to some extent, the Canadian fires are the result of climate change,
Oh, very much so.
climate collapse, and certainly the floods in, you know, the Western United States and the events even in Acapulco. I mean, there seems to be an increasingly number of almost unexplainable emergencies that are taking place, which those that have been concerned about climate have predicted for years.
Mm-hmm.
So now
Yeah.
it's happening.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Maybe the job of activists now is to connect the dots.
Yes. So say, you know, we need to do emergency preparation because of X, Y, and Z. And
Mhm.
you know, one of the issues we encountered, we've encountered it in the Extinction Rebellion movement, and even in some of the work we've done in activism as medicine, is the fact that people get involved, and then at the slightest problem, or maybe even a somewhat more significant problem, they disappear. In other words, people get involved in a movement. And I mean, the worst example is someone that, you know, I went to block a bank on Friday, and on Monday, the bank didn't declare a climate emergency, so it doesn't work, so I'm not going to do it anymore.
Right.
But there are people that are very serious that have been involved for 6 months, and year, 2 years, and get burnt out. Somehow the two of you, despite a worsening situation, the war in Europe, the war in the Middle East, you keep plugging at it. So how do you do that? What's your motivation?
Well, I'm very fortunate, Guy. I'm very, very fortunate. I have a partner who is so supportive, and that's really very uncommon. I've seen lots of my friends, their marriages have disappeared because they got into more activism and the other partner didn't really appreciate that. But so I have Julie. I have a very, very good friend now in Northern California. He's a brilliant man, a forest ecologist, actually, like Will Ripple. And we talk probably, every couple of days. And we vent, that's for sure. But we share the latest information, and that's good. You know, one thing that I remember that really, really helped me, and I forgot about it, and I should recommend this to young people. Years ago, I discovered Rumi, right? At the time when there was a lot of Rumi in the media because it had been discovered that he was the most popular poet in the United States. And then I discovered that back in what are we going back to, 1200s or 1300s, that he was at that time the most popular poet in the world, in the known world. And so wisdom and connection with the spirit is really, really helpful for us, I think, of all ages. The simplest, most profound Rumi poem is, "The world advances when we make the step from me to we." So there's my contribution from Rumi. But his poetry is absolutely beautiful. It connects me to the whole of the natural world and my inner self. So that was a great help. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Rumi.
Well, and thank you, Peter, because I sometimes wonder what I would be doing with my life if I hadn't met you. So thank you for that. Something that I will add to the question that John posed is we need to lament, we need to grieve, and Peter and I do it on a fairly regular basis. I cry probably once a day. Maybe Peter's a little bit less than that, but I used to think that if we just educated people enough about the climate emergency, that about climate change in general, that they would then, feel what they needed to feel in order to act. And then I realized, yeah, no, we've got to help people feel the feelings of acceptance, vulnerability, just a deep grief around the loss. Frank, the people that you're talking about, they don't want to lose what they have, right?
Yeah.
And so if they just ignore all this, then they don't have to lose it. It looks like, or they won't lose it until it's taken away from them by their, wildfire summer or drought summer or flood summer. But this is a quote from a young gal that we met here in Victoria, in British Columbia, Antonia Paquin. She said, this is her list of how we fix the climate. Tune into what Indigenous land defenders and water protectors have been saying for hundreds of years. Breathe deep and ground yourself in gentleness and self-compassion so that you feel safe. She says, have adventure conversations with others and bring up things like climate, the human condition, hope, guilt, fear, grief, and love. Vulnerability is powerful. Connect deeply with your fellow humans and know that they probably have similar fears and doubts that you have. And that when we share those things, it can be very healing. And this one, she says, spend time in nature, forest bathing. Remember, the earth is magical and resilient. But this is what got me. She said, cry and cry and cry, then laugh. It's okay to feel like a hot mess. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I had something on communication and messaging. I read a book called Don't Be Such a Scientist. And you may have run into this, right? And he criticizes the scientific and academic community for being too wonkish, talking too much in the language of numbers and graphs and data points and all of this. And I think he's right. I mean, we have to go towards Hollywood if we're going to reach people, because every time we use a number in a presentation, you lose half the audience. And it's I just think it's true that we have to be more fluent in narrative and story and less interested in, spend less time talking about numbers. And maybe we can reach more people that way. So.
That's interesting. Do you guys know Chip and Dan Heath? They wrote Sticky. That was their first one. They've written a few since then. But the idea of Sticky, how to make ideas stick, is that they came up with a formula that helps you communicate something that actually sticks in people's minds. And Frank's story is a big part of it. Metaphor is a big part of it. Analogy is a big part of it. So whenever you use a number, it's like you have to compare it to something. Right. So you have to say that it's 39 football fields, right, or something, because people they can't picture 39, but they can picture a lot of football fields, right? Something like that. So, but they always say, like, you have to create a story around what you want to stick in people's minds and hearts. Yeah. Right. So I wonder if we need to sit, like, almost have like a retreat and say, what are the most important messages to get across today? How, what are the stories we can tell around those facts and figures and principles and things like that?
Right. Yeah, that's so.
I just want to respond to Frank that I can tell you, Frank, firsthand, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is what I deal with every day. numbers and calculations and projections. And years ago, my friends told me, Peter, nobody understands those graphs. Really, they don't understand them. And I said, well, probably, but it's sort of what I can do. But you're absolutely right. That is really barely any communication at all. I've got to agree with you.
Right. Yeah. But for me, going to college was, in a sense, a liability, right? Because that's the language I talk to other people, and then nobody else seems to get it.
Oh, you became obtuse also, did you?
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh boy.
You have any thoughts, JLo?
Yeah, a lot. Obviously, whenever I listen to you guys, I'm like, my head's just spinning. I'm taking a couple of notes. I'm like, there's just the potential here to, as you said, make the world better, make it cleaner, make it safer, all these things that we can do instead of being insular little nodes of fear and worry and doubt and uncertainty. The idea of, I think that you've really dove into here was, being active, taking initiative and agency, realizing we do have agency, right? Like the people that stand out and stop traffic or throw paint on paintings or sit down in their politician's office and refuse to leave. That level of agency creates community and connection and washes away a lot of the other things. And I think it's so essential. And I'm wondering if you could maybe give, like, what would be each of you, the top 3 ideas you would have for young people to get into activism and stay active and stay in it? What would you say would your 3 like bullet point ideas? Write them down on your wrist in pen, kind of thing.
Yeah, I can give you one right away. Because the biggest thing that's helped me was a book I read many years ago, which was Gandhi's autobiography. A wonderful, wonderful book, a totally honest book, in which he said, and he'd already had these great successes at mobilizing people, in which he says, what you must never do is think about the result in the future of what you're trying to do. Never, ever do that, he said. Do what you know is right today and tomorrow, and keep doing it. This has been a great help, really, because when you start, going down that road, not helpful at all. Do what you can do your best, which is what is right. So thank you, Gandhi.
Yes.
I think something I often lament with Peter that revolutions were fomented in coffee houses late at night. And we don't have coffee houses that stay open late enough to foment anything anymore. So I think we have to find different ways to get people together. And one of them is to choose a plant-based diet, and then to find that loving, compassionate group of people that also made that choice, and to start doing potlucks and to start getting together with them and talking about all these things. The talking it through, the talking it out, the connecting with other people is such a big part of transformation. Yeah.
Nice.
Biggest lessons I guess I've made, and I made that through my medical practices. I'm a Brit, right? So I made a great transformation in my Britness because of the indigenous people who I got to know and very much enjoyed in my medical practices. So I came to the conclusion that, yes, there are 2 kinds of people in this world. There are the people that know that Mother Earth is their mother, and the people that don't. And those poor people that don't, they ain't got no mother. So you know what the word for that is. And that's our civilization, right? That's our society. So we got to learn from those people. Very lucky in British Columbia. We have a lot of. The miracle is that despite the British oppression and assimilation, mainly British, the miracle is that they've kept their traditions and their what we called worldview. And We got to learn from them. One thing that I used to try and remind myself was that I'm the last person in the world to be telling people what to do about the problems in the world, because I'm the cause. And the answers are with the indigenous people.
Yeah, that's a good point, Peter. And gratitude, right? Gratitude for what we do have. Yeah, is transformative. Something else that most citizens in the West, maybe around the world, don't do is to create political will. And a lot of people have given up. They say, "Oh, I wrote a letter." I think, Frank, you were talking about that. It's like, I wrote oh, no, John. I wrote a letter and nothing happened. It's like, no. They need thousands of letters on any topic. I asked a politician on our Parliament Hill was asked, well, what would it take for you guys to like do what you have to do? And he said 300,000 people on Parliament Hill. For a little, our little population that's so spread out, that would be a lot of people on Parliament Hill. We had 20,000 young people just before COVID. Remember was that 2019? Yeah. And Fridays for Future did all those marches around the world. That was so uplifting. And I'm no conspiracy theorist anymore, but sometimes I think, oh, did the pandemic happen just to shut down all that youthful enthusiasm? Because it sure did, right? It kiboshed all those movements that were happening around the world. It's really unfortunate, but people they can write letters, sign petitions, send emails. I used to say send faxes, but that doesn't work much anymore. Make phone calls, visit their elected officials at all levels, right? Because our townships and our cities, our municipalities, they have to be making changes, right? Right on up to national level. We can be writing to the United Nations. We can be voting in candidates who understand the climate emergency, talking to others about how they can create political will. We've done, remember, Peter, where we used to live, we did an afternoon where we had the postcards ready to go. And we had crayons and markers, and people drew on one side and then they wrote their message on the other side, and the address was already there. And then we took them and mailed them, right, to make sure that they got off. But that was a good afternoon's activist activity. Yeah. People are pooped, right? We're pooped. It's still kind of post-pandemic for a lot of us. People are struggling to pay their mortgages and having to make decisions between paying for their prescriptions and buying their food. I know that. I see that in my family. And we who are privileged enough to not be struggling that way, we need to work extra hard on behalf of the people who are struggling just day to day. But there are lots of people who aren't struggling. And instead of them trying to get richer all the time, then maybe they could just try to help make the world a better place all the time.
Right.
But maybe nobody's asked them to do that. I don't know.
So when we were in Prince George, where we got to know a lot of really good, interesting indigenous people, and we learned a lot. And when we got involved in our environmental campaigns there, the indigenous elders would say, you want to save the forests, you've got to work with the forests. You've got to start communicating with the spirits of the forest. You go into the forest and you will get your answers on what you have to do. Remember, Julie, the same thing with the river. You want to save this river? You better go down to the river and ask the river what you have to do. And by golly, it worked. And I'm reminded of the fact that the indigenous people worldwide, if they want to achieve something, what do? They dream it. They dream it. We don't do that. Maybe we ought to.
Wow.
Frank, anything else? JLo?
I'm good. This has just been wonderful for me, and it's been a real pleasure. So I appreciate you very much.
Yeah,
Peter,
agree.
Julie, do you have anything else you want to add?
Well, I could talk about this for a week, so let's do it again sometime.
Well, we would like to. We're thinking of, circling around after 6 months with some of the people we've talked with. I think it would be a very positive thing. So I want to thank you very much for coming. And I thought it was a really enjoyable conversation.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're,
Thanks for having us.
you really provide
Yeah,
a unique.
thanks, John, and thanks, Sheila, because it's been a very, very actually enjoyable, fulfilling, pleasant experience on I guess the subject. So that's a miracle in itself. Thank you.
Good to
And
see
thank you, Frank, for really enjoyed what you had to say.
Thank you for watching this session of AIM's Roundtable Forum. For more information about Julie and Peter, please review the show notes below this video or go to the Activism is Medicine website at activismismedicine.net. Thanks again for watching.